Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to Arch with Imran. I'm Imran and I hope you guys are having a lovely day. So, you want to become an architect in the UK. In this video, I'm explaining the entire process all the way from applying to university to getting fully registered as an architect. I'm also going to be discussing a couple of things like if you've completed architecture in the UK and want to move abroad, or if you want to move to the UK midway through your studies and continue in the UK. So, let's get into it. Now, before we get into it, there's a couple of things you need to know. Firstly, RIBA. What is RIBA? RIBA is the Royal Institute of British Architects, and it's the governing body, it's the professional body for all architecture in the UK. They also organise a number of events and have a number of regulations and communities within them. Also, you'll need to know that the architecture journey within the UK is split into 3 parts, RIBA Stage 1, 2 and 3, and I'll be explaining all of these throughout the video. So let's start off at the beginning. You're in the process of applying to university. There are a number of different universities in the UK and they have a number of different structures. You have bachelors that are 3 years full-time, or you have bachelors that are 4 years and they have a placement year in the middle. Now that can be after first year or second year, but most likely it's after second year. And then there are also some universities in the UK, for example Nottingham, that offer a Masters in Architecture, which is 5 years, and that includes your Part 1 and Part 2 consecutively together. It's also important to note that some universities classify the degree slightly differently. Most universities in the UK will do a BA, which is a Bachelor of Arts. However, there are some universities, for example Bath, that do BSc and they categorise it as Bachelor of Science. But essentially the content is very, very similar. Okay, so when you've applied, you will have an interview. Now in this interview, you'll need to take a portfolio and you'll have a quick talking to an architect just to understand whether or not they think that you're a good fit for the university. Now what do you need in this portfolio? What I recommend is anything creative, so things like drawings, any photography, sketches you've done. Essentially, you want skills that show you're a good artist, you understand composition, you kind of have an idea of your style, and if you've done something like A-level art or art in university or photography, it's really good to put some of your work in there just to show that you know what you're doing. It's important to note that I wouldn't recommend putting architecture work in. The reason being is they're not expecting you to be good at architecture. Unless it's professional work and technical drawings you've done in a firm, I wouldn't recommend putting any architecture work in this portfolio, because realistically you're there to learn architecture, you're not expected to know it before you go. So now, assuming you've got through your application process, congratulations, you're now in university. Now this is part 1, and what I'm going to be doing is explaining the structure that I had in my university, and keep in mind it may vary in a few others. But all of my units were split into 4 categories. We had history, which is more of the history of architecture. We also did a bit on the future of architecture. And in 3rd year, this will be my dissertation subject. You also have design. Now this is your major design projects. These are the big studio projects where you're given a brief and you have to design a building to that brief. It's also the work you do in studio, and that you'll most likely have a mentor for that guides you through the design process. Another unit was technology. Now technology is more of the technical side. You do a lot more engineering, you do technical drawings, you do environmental strategies, you look at things like passive house, insulation, the physical construction element, things like foundations as well. And then finally, I had communication as my 4th unit. Communication is, in my opinion, one of the more important ones, because it's how well you can articulate the design to a client. It's how you present your work, it's how you can actually communicate your design to someone that doesn't understand technical drawings. Now, each of these units have different weightings. My university, University of Portsmouth, has a slightly different structure where each of the units is weighted at 20 credits and they all result in the exact same weighting. Now, I personally don't think this structure is the best. There are other universities, for example, Bristol University, that have the weightings different per unit. So for example, in another university, your design module, the big projects may be worth 60 credits, and your dissertation or history modules may be worth 15 credits. I personally think this is a better structure, so if the university you're looking at does have this structure, I would advise it, because it's more considerate to an architect specifically, whereas when they're all weighted equally, it's more general of a normal degree. Now, in my university, you need 120 credits to graduate, and you need to have at least a pass in every unit. Once you've got that, if you don't, you can resit over summer, and you may even have to resit a year. After that, you then are able to graduate, and you've completed your first half of Part 1. Now, moving on to the second half of Part 1, you have Part 1 practice. Now, this will be a year in industry, and it's important to note you don't have to do it consecutively. From this point onwards, you can space out all of these processes however you want. You could work in between, and you could delay your studies if you have other things you're doing. Now, in your Part 1 practice, you will find an employer to log your experience with REBA, Professional Experience and Development Record. Now, what this does is it is a record that members of REBA can access just to prove that you have completed the work you say you've done. And in this, your employer will essentially guide you through work in industry. Work in industry is really different to university. There's a lot more physical challenges, things like budget, working with clients, and the entire process is quite different. So it's really important to do this practice soon, I believe, because you kind of understand the world of work faster. Once you've done that, you can then start Part 2. Now, in Part 2, you go back to university, and it will be a master's most likely. However, some universities do a bachelor's as Part 2. I personally would recommend master's, and you'll find you can either do it 2 years full-time or between 3 and 5 years part-time, depending on how much you do. Now, if you are moving from another country, for example, I get a lot of questions about people in India wanting to do masters in the UK. What you'll do is you'll have another interview process. You'll have to bring a portfolio of all of your work. And what they'll do is the university will compare the work you've done and the projects you've done to their requirements. If they line up well, you essentially can just join, or they may ask you to do another project or do another brief or fulfill some little bits of work just to catch you up to the level that the university expects students to be at. If you're wanting to do this, I would highly recommend to just reach out to your university, send an email, explain your circumstance, because all the universities have different kind of procedures. Now, after you've completed that, you can now do your Part 2 experience. Now, to apply for Part 3, you need at least 24 months work in industry. So this is why you can do your Part 2 experience here, and it's another 12 months, so it's another year. Now, this will be under direct supervision architect, and you'll have a lot more responsibility. You'll have a lot more pressure put on you just to see if you can handle and function correctly in a place of work. At this point in time, you can also become a REBA associate. Now, this isn't free, and what it is it's essentially a network of British architects in the UK. You can contact them for help. They organise events, and it starts from as cheap as £5 a month. So if you wish to do this, you can go ahead and do this when you're in your Part 2 experience. Now, after you've completed your Part 2 experience, you can now do Part 3. Now, after speaking to a number of different architects, they recommend doing Part 3 as soon as possible after Part 2, just because the amount of benefits you get once completing Part 3. Now, Part 3 will take either 6 to 12 months, depending on the amount of time you do it and how frequently you do it. It includes a oral exam and a written exam and an assessment of all of the previous work you've done and your experience. Part 3 essentially contains you leading a project, a single brief with a team of people, and you're kind of assessed for your ability to function in a number of different fields and manage a project as a whole. And then once you have completed this, congratulations, you are now an architect. Now, your final step is getting registered. You need to apply and you'll be added to ARB. Now, what is the ARB? ARB is the Architects Registration Board, and it contains a list of every practicing architect in the UK. If you want to call yourself an architect, you have to be on this list, and there's about 43,000 working architects in the UK right now. Now, what I would advise is, you are not able to call yourself an architect until you have done this. So during your process, you can call yourself a number of different names: architect's assistant, interior designer, landscape architect. However, because The title architect itself is protected in the UK. You can suffer penalties if you call yourself an architect without being on the ARB. And most likely any projects you work on in the future, they'll do a quick search on the ARB just to make sure you're a registered architect. So that's quite an important step. Now, moving on, what if you're going abroad? If you want to go abroad after completing architecture in the UK, you'll most likely need a conversion course, which will take a few months. And in this, you'll most likely just get updated on all of the local regulations, all of the changes and the similarities between where you've studied and that place. Now, you may need to do a bit of experience for a few months just to get your footing and understand the different architecture process in that country. But again, your best bet is just doing a Google search, and if there is anyone you're wanting to go reach out to, just contact them and get advice. Now, you may also have to do an exam if you want to do a conversion course just to prove your competency and your understanding is to a competent level. Now guys, I really hope this video was informative and helpful. I get a number of questions regarding the process of studying architecture. If you guys do have any more questions, please leave them in the comments and I'll answer them the best as I can. And as always, I hope you guys have a lovely day. Take it easy.